right. So we have some absolutely horrific updates coming out right now from the Gaza Strip. So I got a couple of different things here that I want to get into. First, just some quick updates in terms of the overall casualty numbers, and then obviously the big sort of developing story that's unfolding right now is this massive strike on a hospital in southern Gaza that, as of right now, the latest death toll that we have is I've seen as high as 500, I've seen as high as 800, but we just can't be sure because, again, it's a breaking, developing story right now. So here from the UN, just to give us an update on the casualty numbers, spokesperson for the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, they say with a staggering 4,200 people killed, and this obviously doesn't include that recent attack on the hospital, over 1 million people displaced in just 10 days, and large areas in the Gaza Strip reduced to rubble. We have grave fears about the toll on civilians in the coming days. Military operations show no signs of abating. The continued siege on Gaza is affecting water supply, food, medicine, and other basic needs, and there are daily indications of violations of the laws of war and international human rights law, and this is before we even get to the potential upcoming Israeli ground invasion of Gaza, after telling, again, 1.1 million people to simply up and walk through the rubble of North Gaza to go to the south. And this hospital bombing we're about to get to here, that was in the south. So, I mean, we've already had plenty of reports of Israel launching strikes against people who were trying to flee south. Not that it was even remotely a reasonable demand in the first place, but, I mean, just staggering numbers here. Again, 4,200 people killed, over 1 million people displaced in 10 days. 10 days. We've had well over 1,000 children at this point that have been killed. They also say that the death toll includes a large number of women and children, as well as at least 11 Palestinian journalists, 28 medical staff, and 14 UN colleagues. And it remains unclear how many more bodies may be buried underneath the rubble, with many families missing loved ones, terrified about their uncertain fate. And they say with numerous health facilities hit by bombardment, so this most recent hospital one that we're going to get to here isn't even the first, and others destroyed beyond the breaking point. There are serious concerns about the accessibility of medical care for the many thousands that have been injured and for the estimated 50,000 pregnant women, as well as people with chronic physical and mental health issues. Okay, so now we get on to this big breaking story. So, I mean, again, obviously, I'm going to try to be as responsible with this as possible. We do not know many of the details from this. You know, there hasn't been any sort of like investigation into it, or, you know, what potential even source this may have come from, but this is basically what we have so far. So they say here from Reuters, hundreds are dead in Gaza hospital bombing. According to local authorities, they say an Israeli airstrike killed hundreds of people at a Gaza City hospital on Tuesday, health authorities in the Hamas-run enclave said, and the United Nations said an Israeli airstrike also hit one of its own schools that was being used as a shelter. So we have two different strikes here that took place almost simultaneously, one against that UN facility and one against this hospital. They say a Gaza civil defense chief said on Al Jazeera television that more than 300 people were killed at the Al-Ali Al-Arabi hospital, and a Gaza health ministry official said at least 500 people were killed and injured. And again, these are low estimates compared to what I've seen that are more up to date. They say Israel's military said that it does not have any details on the reported bombing, which could mean so many different things. Obviously, I've seen other reports that have come out that, okay, we're investigating that this may have potentially been a rocket that was fired by Hamas and it was a dud, and so it accidentally fell on this hospital. I just don't know. Okay, again, this wouldn't be the first time that Israel's military has targeted hospitals and tried to give justifications after the fact for targeting those hospitals and saying, well, there were Hamas fighters there, or whatever the case may be. So again, I'm not going to make a 100% definitive statement at this point, but either way, I think the conclusion from this should be the same regardless of what the source was, and that is that we need an immediate ceasefire, because if there isn't a ceasefire put in place, this kind of shit is just going to continue happening, and hundreds and even thousands of people are going to continue to lose their lives for fucking nothing. I mean, nothing at the end of the day, right? And so we move on here because there's a couple other things that I wanted to get to in terms of the hospital system in Gaza right now. They say that hospital staffers in Gaza are now having to drink IV bags, okay, because they have run out of water. We also have this, breaking: Al-Shifa Hospital, the largest hospital in Gaza, is officially out of electricity. This is, again, called collective punishment. This is what Israel did when they first were launching this offensive into Gaza. They cut off the water, they cut off the electricity, they imposed a complete siege without anything able to get in or out of the Gaza Strip, and then proceeded to bomb it into oblivion, again, including civilian infrastructure, right? And so you have basically what amounts to be a war crime here of collective punishment of the Palestinian people in response to that Hamas attack in southern Israel just about 10 days ago. We also have, just as a reminder here from Mehdi Hassan, last week an IDF spokesperson, Daniel Hagari, said, quote, "The emphasis is on damage and not on accuracy," which may give you an indication in terms of how much they actually give a single solitary shit about, protecting civilian lives within Gaza, right? I mean, this is a big, back and forth argument that has been going on for a while now, where a lot of people are justifying Israel's actions and saying, well, there's a big difference between Hamas going in and slaughtering civilians versus the Israeli military that is trying oh so desperately to avoid civilian casualties. And there was another piece that stood out to me in one of these Associated Press articles that I was reading, which basically I think summed it up pretty well. And it wasn't even that they were attempting to do it, but effectively what they said is like, during a couple recent Israeli airstrikes, they killed dozens and dozens of civilians, and they also killed, apparently or allegedly, one top, Hamas military official or Hamas fighter. And it's like, that basically summarizes the entire thing. And there was they put a comma, and then at the end of the sentence, they said, in strikes that Israel claims is specifically targeting at Hamas. And it's like, well, even if you are, quote unquote, targeting Hamas, but you're killing one top Hamas fighter, and you're also killing dozens of civilians in the process of killing that top Hamas fighter, then what do you expect the conclusion from us is supposed to be? That you're actually trying to avoid civilian casualties when you have a ratio of what, like 24-1 of civilians to Hamas fighters? I mean, we don't know the exact numbers in terms of how many Hamas militants or whatever have been killed during this offensive, but I would bet every single thing that I fucking own that when we get to the end of this, and hopefully that's going to be soon, although I doubt it, but when we get to the end of this siege of Gaza and this obliteration of the Gaza Strip, that the overwhelming majority of the casualties are going to be civilians, okay? It's not going to be Hamas fighters that make up the majority of those who are killed in this process. It's going to be civilians. And I'm not just pulling that out of my ass based on what I've seen so far, but this also compares well to other previous, Israeli offensives into the Gaza Strip. I mean, there were some where they killed between 65 to, upwards of 80% civilians, okay? And so it's like, again, when that's your ratio, do you really expect that people are supposed to fall in line with the narrative that you're purely going after Hamas targets, even, along with other statements like Mehdi Hassan pointed out here, that the emphasis is on damage and not on accuracy, when you've already bombed not only, multiple hospitals at this point, taking the most recent one where hundreds were killed off the map, because we don't have all of the details on that yet. But you bombed plenty of other hospitals. You bombed UN, schools and shelters that were being used to shelter people who have been displaced. You bombed mosques. You've bombed residential buildings. You've killed journalists. I mean, what are we supposed to take away from this? That you're the most moral, moral military in the world, as they frequently like to say? I mean, bullshit. Fucking bullshit. And we also have some pretty alarming clips that have been floating around recently as well that I wanted to point out to you guys. So here from Mediaite. There is no humanitarian crisis, says Israeli ambassador in this clash on Sky News. So let's just watch a little bit of this clip here.
Humanitarian crisis in Gaza this morning?
There is no humanitarian crisis because...
There isn't?
There is no. Israel is in charge of the safety of the Israelis. Hamas is in charge of the safety of the Palestinians.
We've been showing pictures this morning that would illustrate that there is a humanitarian crisis in Gaza.
Can I ask you something?
Yeah.
Are you a mother?
Yes.
What would you think if your children would have been executed in front of your eyes? Would you expect your government to think about those Nazis committing those crimes and to say, wait a second, first of all, we need to protect the enemy, and then to protect my children? Your children come as priority to your prime minister.
So
do you know that?
We have been showing images this morning that illustrate that there is a humanitarian crisis in Gaza.
So blame Hamas and ask Hamas why they started those atrocities, walking around.
So you acknowledge that there is a humanitarian crisis?
I'm saying there is no. Israel is working.
So what do you think is happening?
What is happening? There is a war in Gaza, a war that Hamas started by committing a horrible massacre on innocent Israelis. The world have seen that. Have seen that. Wait a second.
Innocent civilians.
Just I want to say and give a little.
Okay. So, I mean, again, Very similar narrative to what we've been talking about since this offensive started. I mean, I've seen this dramatic escalation of them comparing Hamas, or in some cases even the entirety of the Palestinian population, to quote unquote Nazis, which is just so beyond ridiculous at face value, as if like they are not the ones under siege, the people in Gaza, the people in, you know, the Palestinian people in Gaza and the West Bank, okay, as if they're engaging in the mass extermination of Jewish people. I mean, it's just, again, completely ridiculous. And really her analogy that she gives there, and this statement that she gives, kind of gives us perspective in terms of what their priority is there, right? She points out the brutal Hamas attack, and she says, you're a mother, right? And imagine that your kids were killed in front of you, right? Are you going to turn around and say, first we need to protect the enemy? Okay, and I think her using the word enemy there is, again, pretty illuminating, because the first question was about the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, which she just flatly denies. She says there is no humanitarian crisis in Gaza, even given what the statistics that we just read, right? Over 4,000 killed, 1 million people displaced, no water, no electricity, right? All of that, the obvious humanitarian crisis and bloodshed that's happening, there's no humanitarian crisis. But again, the word enemy used in that context, we're talking about civilians. We're talking about the humanitarian crisis in Gaza right now. That was the original question, and she refers to them as your enemies. We're not talking about protecting enemies, okay? That wasn't the question that was asked to you. The question was not, should Israel avoid killing Hamas militants? No, the question was, how should Israel be responding to the humanitarian crisis in Gaza right now? And her response is, well, if you had your kid who was killed in front of you, you wouldn't show mercy to the enemy. Okay, so again, giving the implication that she considers everybody in the Gaza Strip to implicitly be the enemy. I mean, again, they have no distinguishing between a Hamas militant versus a Palestinian civilian who had nothing to do with the recent attack. And this isn't unique, right? We've seen this so many different times. We've seen, plenty of different Israeli spokespeople and politicians and pundits who have said the exact same thing, and in many instances in a much more genocidal way. And I mean, this is, again, very similar language. We're seeing this repeated as if they all got the same exact playbook. We have here, as pointed out by Michael Tracy, Israeli official proclaims the fate of the entire Western civilization is at stake in the war and connects Hamas to a global jihadist movement backed by China and Russia, and cites US and UK decimation of Nazi Germany as a precedent for the total decimation that Israel now seeks to inflict. So again, they're comparing Hamas to Nazis, right? Now again, I'm not a fan of fucking Hamas, okay? I don't want Hamas to be in power in Gaza. They're a fundamentalist Islamic group. Obviously, my priorities do not align with that in any way, shape, or form, okay? But to compare them to Nazis makes no fucking sense. Number one, on an ideological ground, but it also removes some of the actual goals that Hamas has, some of the openly stated positions that Hamas has on things like ending the apartheid, on ending the siege of Gaza, and allowing people in Gaza to live freely, right? And to end the ongoing settler terrorism and expansion of illegal settlements in the West Bank. Those are actually some of the things that Hamas wants to see happen, right? It's not as if they're just Nazis who are hell-bent on the destruction of all Jews around the world. No, I mean, that's just simply not their goals, right? And it's the same thing comparing them to ISIS. I mean, they're trying to draw this comparison to, again, explicitly give the justification to go in and wipe everybody out there, because if all Palestinians are Nazis, okay, then I guess that gives you a justification to wipe them off the face of the earth. I mean, that's what is being done here. Again, they compare it to the decimation in Nazi Germany, and I've seen other even more specific comparisons here to the bombing of Dresden, and they use it as a positive, right? The bombing of Dresden that killed thousands and thousands and thousands of innocent civilians, and even the comparisons to 9/11 and the U.S. response to 9/11 of going into countries like Iraq and Afghanistan and killing hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of innocent people. And they use this as a justification. They say this is what we're trying to replicate, right? Nobody told the United States to act reasonably after 9/11 or to use restraint. Well, they fucking should have, and plenty of people did. The United States government didn't listen to those people, and then look what the fuck happened. The same thing here. And again, even if they go in and they completely wipe out Hamas, then what? Then what's going to happen? Are you going to install some other form of political leadership there? We know, given Benjamin Netanyahu's opposition to a two-state solution, whoever he would put in power there definitely would not be in favor of a secular two-state solution or anything remotely close to that, right? So what happens then? And by the way, why do you think so many of these young people ended up joining Hamas in the first place in Gaza? Do you think maybe there's a correlation between the abject suffering and depravity that they were forced to grow up in as a result of Israeli policies that could have played a role in that? I mean, this is not a conspiracy. This is just understanding how history works. When you put people in a literal open air prison, give them no prospects whatsoever for a future or a sustainable life, then what do you think is going to happen? Of course, it's going to breed more radicalization. And what do you think your bombing campaign right now is going to breed in the future? More radicalization. So, I mean, all of this is just, it's nonsensical bloodshed. And they're using this rhetoric to try to justify it further, to try to justify what is effectively, it looks like, an ongoing attempted genocide. We had more examples here. When you, the UK, fight Nazi Germany, you knew many civilians got attacked. Altogether, 600,000 civilian Germans got killed. Was it worth it to defeat Nazi Germany? The answer was yes. I would argue killing 600,000 civilians in Nazi Germany, probably not a great thing there. Okay, not something we should be striving for or trying to achieve or using to justify, current war crimes being committed by the Israeli government. I mean, it's fucking unreal, dude. As if this is a good thing that 600,000 civilian Germans got killed, or as if that's even really comparable to the situation we're in right now. I mean, you're pointing to, mass atrocities committed throughout history, whether it's, Nazi Germany in World War II, or whether it's, the United States actions after 9/11, and you're saying these are good things. They're Arab Nazis. That's what Palestinians are. Say this motherfucker, Representative Brian Mast. Okay, and keep in mind, this guy Brian Mast, he was never even officially in like the IDF security forces. This is a guy who put on an IDF uniform and wore it to Congress. And made a comparison point to Rashida Tlaib flying a Palestinian flag outside of her office, which she has done for the entire time she's been in office because she's a Palestinian American, and made the comparison of wearing a foreign country's military outfit to Congress, inside Congress. Can you imagine if that was any other country? If somebody showed up, imagine if Rashida Tlaib had shown up to Congress wearing a Hamas military outfit. What the fuck do you think would have happened there? Or any other military, the Russian military, even the Ukrainian military. I mean, that would be considered like borderline treason. You're wearing a foreign country's military uniform inside the halls of Congress? I mean, what the fuck are we doing at this point? Especially when he doesn't even have a real connection to the IDF. He's just pulling that out of his ass, I guess. I mean, just utter insanity. Utter insanity. And we also have this, as pointed out here by Ryan Grimm, a resolution calling for a Gaza ceasefire has been introduced in the House. Here's a list of co-sponsors. Surprise, surprise, it's only 13. 13 out of the 435 members of the U.S. House of Representatives are willing to call for a ceasefire. Okay? Again, thousands and thousands and thousands of people killed already, tens of thousands potentially already injured. Okay? Untold amount of people missing at this point. We have infrastructure being flattened to the ground. We have hospitals running dry or being bombed. Okay? We have mosques being bombed, UN shelters being bombed. 13 Democrats call for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. 13. What's the percentage on that? 5%? 5% of Congress is willing to call for a ceasefire? A ceasefire. As if the continued bombing is going to get us anywhere. Absolutely insane. Again, from Karine Jean-Pierre, we also have Joe Biden going to Israel on Wednesday, which is tomorrow, on October 18th, to demonstrate his steadfast support for Israel in the face of Hamas's brutal terrorist attack and to consult on next steps. So I would love to sit here and tell you guys that Joe Biden is going to go there and he's going to use the incredible leverage that he does have as the president of the United States and the most fervent backer of the Israeli government and funder of the Israeli government, that he's going to go there and he's going to demand an immediate ceasefire. He's not. And in all likelihood, maybe he'll try to put his finger on the thumb in the tiniest imaginable way that you could go for. But he's not going there to end this, okay? He's going there to stand side by side with Benjamin Netanyahu, who, oh, by the way, a vast majority of Israelis blame for all of this fucking chaos right now and want him to resign. So, I mean, there's your latest updates again. I mean, obviously, we'll have to track with the hospital story. This is just the most up-to-date information that I have right now. I'm not a military expert. I don't know how to determine between the different allegations. It was an Israeli strike. It was a Hamas dud strike or something like that. But again, the conclusion from that, regardless, is that we have hundreds of people who have been killed just from that one action alone. Okay, we have thousands who have been killed on top of that. We have over 1 million people displaced, and we immediately need a ceasefire to this. And then, immediately after that ceasefire, to address the underlying issues here, which is, again, the apartheid, the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people, the illegal expansion of settlements into the West Bank, and settler terrorism. Those are the kinds of things that need to be addressed if there's ever going to be even the remotest chance in hell of a lasting peace here.
Everyone is saying good politic guy has the best politic. Believe me. No one does it like him. Believe me. Everyone is saying